Fiber Trek. My name is Sarah. I'm joined today, there she goes, by my dog Ruby, who I'm hoping will be good. Hello, are you being good? I see you. We're coming to you from a very snowy southern part of the state of Maine, where I work and live with my parents during the week. And we just got 12 inches of snow, and I'm really excited about it. I'm a snow gal through and through, and we will be out on our skis this afternoon, tromping around, romping around, and hopefully getting an opportunity to do some hills. So that's always fun with Ruby. Thank you so much for all the empathy of my last podcast, yard sale. I made a full recovery, so thanks to the good old legs. My rugged legs. The next day I had no residual after effect, no limp, no nothing. I thought it was going to be a long recovery. It did have some muscle stuff going on in my upper back, but you know what? I was able to do everything that I wanted to do, so super proud of my body for keeping me on track, keeping me moving through the world. Hi. Let's see. So today on the podcast, I am going to talk about things I've been working on, a finished item, kind of where Clementine meets Fiber Trek. Clementine made me do it as my sewing vlog. I've got a yarn review from Blacker, and I'm going to try to bring back a little bit into the podcast discussion of landscape and place and ecology. That's kind of my niche where I started. It is one of my driving interest is the relationship between land, people, and wool, and so I thought, I really need to pull that back in. So I have some footage of some of our hikes. I'm going to talk a little bit about mammals in this state. I've got tracks, and I'm not an expert tracker, and I'm not a naturalist, by training. I spent a lot of time working in the experiential ed world and doing environmental education, but everything I know I've just known through my own kind of curiosity and research. So it's not like I have this formal education. But anyway, I thought it'd be interesting to share what I've been seeing and talk a little bit about, our experience up here in this state. So at the end, I'm going to take you out with Ruby and I'm going to talk a little bit about some tracks that we found and just kind of the winter world of Maine. So I think I'm going to get started right on my works in progress. I am working on the Oa by Kate Davies. I'm sorry about that glare. This is a kind of an outerwear sweater. It does include a hood, and this was from her Isla collection. I'm knitting it in a 3-ply El Centrum. It was designed for Habuko yarn, which is a 2-ply sport weight. And I wanted something, I like a 3-ply structure for sweaters, especially if I think they're going to get a lot of exposure to the elements, not just like kind of going to work or, in the classroom, but that they might go on a canoe trip, they might go camping, they might be out skiing. So I like to have that 3-ply structure, which cuts down on the wear, the pilling, etc. So I picked this up from Midwinter Yarns in the UK, and it's a little bit heavier probably than what Kate's yarn weighs in at grist. So, but that's okay for someone like me because I'm a fairly tight knitter, and I went up a needle size, so I'm knitting this on a US 5, and I am getting gauge. I'm not getting row gauge exactly, which could be problematic as it's a raglan sleeve. So I'm starting to contemplate that. I'm contemplating the all over increases when I knit the sleeve. This is not an intuitive process for me. The technical piece of knitting is not something that comes easy to me. I can do some shaping, but the idea of adding short rows or modifying shoulders, those types of things, like length I can do, width I can do, I can think about, maybe I want to start the increases a little bit lower, maybe I want to start them a little bit higher, but I'm much more interested in sourcing my yarn structure, the breed, how will that respond, my results, and, so that aspect of this craft. So when I get a pattern, I typically just want to be able to sit down and knit, and yes, maybe even be just told what to do. So Kate recommends for this particular pattern that you knit the body first. I typically knit sleeves first. I can get my gauge swatch that way, then the sleeves are done, etc. So I took her advice on this particular piece because she says that by knitting the body first, you really get an understanding of the chart and the pattern. And she is right. So I don't even need to look at the chart anymore because I can read my work, and it's very the word is symmetrical, but it's a very, I don't know the word. So anyway, I'll skip that part. So I'm hoping that when I get to that sleeve, that I will have gathered some intuitive piece, and it will make sense, and I'll be able to visualize where I'm going and what I'm doing. So I'll have two kind of challenges with the sleeves. One is my row gauge and trying to get everything to line up, and the other is going to be increasing. But right now I'm thoroughly enjoying this all over pattern. Did I even show this to you? This all over pattern. So here it is. I'm knitting it in a light gray and a charcoal gray. Imagine that. I do love the traditional classic look of this. Now this is done in a provisional cast on, which I did do with the Untitled yarn, and the more I worked this, it was curling, and it just bothered me. I had a hard time moving it around. It didn't have any structure, and I was worried about that yarn felting. So I went ahead and picked up all stitches and I knit the corrugated ribbing, and I'm so glad that I did because this is so cheerful. When I picked this up, it's really inviting, and I love the pop, and it really started to give me an idea of the finished garment, and it made me feel like I had made a significant amount of progress. Let's take a look at my floats. I knit my color work two-handed. I don't bother very much about the amount of stitches between floats, so I think the maximum number here is 6. I don't choose to trap my floats for that, so it doesn't bother me at all. And I wanted to recommend Diana Walla of Paper Tiger podcast. So she has done a really wonderful discussion of stranded color work, complete with examples and even a discussion almost of the physics of what's happening with your yarn. And I found her style really helpful. It is grounded in examples and provides the visual piece, and so it was really enriching. And I would highly recommend, if you're interested in color work, regardless of your style, etc., that you head on over there, because it's very informative. So thank you so much, Diana, for that. It's Paper Tiger podcast and Stranded Color Work. Let's see what else. I think that's it about this piece. I don't think I'm going to take this to Edinburgh. I've been having a bit of angst about that. What am I going to take? I'm trying to pack light. We'll see what happens. The other piece I have that I'm working on, and really this has been dominating most of my knitting time. I can read when I knit this, or stockinette in the round, and I've been doing a lot of reading. I'm reading the Coyote series by Octavia Randolph, which is set kind of in Anglo-Saxon England, and just on the, and as well as in Scandinavia, kind of around 900 BC, AD, and or CE, Common Era. And anyway, so this is the Lulu, and it is by Coco Knits. And it's a tunic, and I'm knitting this on a US 6 with my Shackleton yarn. And it has built-in gores for the hip increases. I forgot to do the bust decreases and then hip increases, which I think will be fine. Let's see. So it's knit from the top down. I think I've talked about that before. And It's a V-neck. I am at like 22.5 inches. And you can kind of see the gore right there. So I am going to try this on today and see how it works with, I make these dresses called the Guardian. They're Guardian underdresses. They've been drafted from the Ebony pattern by Closet Case file patterns. And Jenny Estelle of Starcroft kind of tweaked it into this perfect dress. It's for knits, and I'm thinking that will be a great layering piece. So kind of the knit and then this with the sleeves. Anyway, so I want to try it on and see how those two lengths look today. And then hopefully I'll be able to cast that bottom off and be ready to pick up the sleeves. I'm going to do a 3/4 length sleeve on this, and I'm thinking I might do a bit of a trumpet sleeve. So I really don't want it tight. I want it to kind of be loose and comfortable over my arms. So that is in the Shackleton yarn. I am getting gauge, and thank you so much for everybody who supported the release of that Shackleton yarn. I'll talk a little bit about that in events. So that's that. A finished piece that I have is kind of another Clementine sewing meets Fiber Trek. I received some fabric from Jody of Maine Yarn and Fiber Supply. She wanted a tunic out of it, and I am sewing that for her. So I use the Endless Summer Tunic by Verb for keeping warm. It is designed for wovens. I've been predominantly using it for knits, so I haven't done it in wovens. This was kind of the first woven that I did it in. I kept all the same shaping, and it fits fine. Same seam allowance and everything. So this fabric is woven, and it's almost like a boucle that's been woven and then maybe fulled. So it is felted. Didn't need to finish the seams, and so I love that. Which means I can do fun things with blanket stitch. So I went ahead and finished all the armholes and neck holes with a blanket stitch in a 2-ply fingering weight yarn. This happens to be the Marlstone Jacob, which is being released from Blacker, and I'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. And so a really nice woolen tunic, and I overlocked all my seams and etc. So yeah, I'm gonna do some more embellishing on this. I really like the canvas of felt. I've done ornaments in the past. I really enjoy doing that every year. Felt ornaments embroidered. And so I have whipped out my handy dandy Alabama Shannon, the geometry of hand sewing. Some beautiful embellishments in here. I'm a big fan of the Cretan stitch. So I'm thinking of doing something like this, maybe around the hem, and doing it all in one color, kind of on this level. And the handy piece about this is that she includes these cards. Now this won't work on this fabric because obviously I can't mark on this fabric, but on other fabric you can mark your grids and then use the grid to create consistent, even stitches, across the garment, etc. So I'm looking forward to playing around. And what I love about it is you can just rip it right out if you don't like it. So and it leaves very little. It doesn't really leave a mark. Another great layering piece. So, hi Sleepy Dobe. Yay, she's asleep. So I recognize that I'm being a little bit quiet because the whole family's home, and so this whole podcast feels a little reserved to me, and perhaps not as lively as I usually am, but such is the way of sharing space and living at your parents' during the week. So many of you know that I'm headed to Edinburgh Yarn Festival next week, and as part of my travels and part of being involved in the festival, I am going to the Podcaster Lounge, which is being sponsored by Blacker Yarns and hosted by Louise of Knit British. And I was sent in advance the new yarn that they'll be releasing. It's actually being released tomorrow, which is Friday, March 8th, maybe. It's the Friday, and this is a breed-specific yarn. It's Jacob, and they hand sorted the fleeces, and when they were skirting them and hand sorting them into 4 distinct bases using the natural fleece colors. So Jacobs have striking 2 colored coats, and they created some traditional marls. So I received marlstone. That's going to be really hard. Oh, that might be better. Which is kind of a real soft gray. And then I received this is clay. So these are the 2 that I received. And let's see, they have a glorious gradient of natural shades, the clay, the marlstone, granite, and basalt, and dyed in the same colors, so the transition from light to dark comes from the fleece itself. So I'll tell you a little bit about their write-up on the Jacob. So even from the same sheep, the pale and dark Jacob fibers have different textures. The lightest shades have wonderful drape and subtle sheen, whereas the darker shades are more bouncy. The subtle variation is one of the many joys of working with wool sourced directly from British producers. The yarn is worsted spun, giving it a smoother handle and wonderful stitch definition, making it ideal for garments and shawls. Despite its smoothness, Jacob is also hard-wearing enough for outerwear and accessories, even socks. So worsted spun means that all of the fibers are aligned when they're headed into the twist, versus woolen spun where they're kind of in a web when they head into the twist, and they're always looking to free themselves. That's why you get a lot of air and loft in woolen spun, why it tends to be warmer. Whereas the worsted, you're not capturing that air in a web, everybody's going in, so you're getting lots of tensile strength, smooth, really can capture luster because you get more surface area of the fiber, and you get less ends coming out of the yarn itself, so less pilling. The breed is believed to have come to the UK from the Middle East, possibly via Spain. Spotted Jacob sheep can be seen in Egyptian wall paintings dated to 1800 BCE, making them one of the most ancient sheep breeds. How wonderful to think that their fiber is still being used almost 4,000 years later. That always gets me kind of excited. So, so those are a couple key pieces, right? So worsted spun, it's a 2-ply, 50 grams, so per 175 meters or 190 yards. They have a recommended US 3 millimeter on their on the label. I knit this, my samples, I knit it on a US 2, a US 6, and a US 3. So I am really partial to fine gauge. I think that this particular yarn created a beautiful fabric on a US 2. It's very structured. And I think a cardigan, it's not going to capture that in this particular light, but maybe you can see the definition of the stitches there. So this has, these have been soaked, they haven't been stretched or anything, and then just dried. So you can see that beautiful balanced US 2. So if you are game and all over cardigan, I think this would be beautiful for Frost at Midnight by Kate Davies in her Yolks book. Here's the US 6, a little bit more drape to it. This would be perfect for the Lulu, where you want a little bit of that kind of see-through fabric. It has, like I said, that drape that will fall, or lace. That 2-ply worsted is going to open up and show that stitch definition beautifully. So here's the US 6. You can see you get a little bit of the give and this one you definitely have that density. And then I use the marlstone to knit the US 2. The US 3, which is their recommended. And that one will be harder to see, obviously, because of the marl. So I'm looking forward to a sweater's worth of this. Since I'm a garment knitter, I always end up having to buy a sweater's worth of stuff. But I've got a couple different plans. I was thinking I would do a Lulu out of the 2-ply. There is a double knitting weight. And let me show you the color card for that. So these aren't going to really be reflective, but look at this beautiful gradient of greens. The DK comes in kind of a shades of pink, purple clay, purple marlstone, purple granite, purple basalt. And then the 4-ply dyed shades are a green through a blue. So yeah, just a really beautiful line and color palette. It's very, I don't want to use the word muted because the colors are rich due to the over-dyed grays. There's lots of depth to them, but they're not obviously jewel-toned and bright. So anyway, I'm really looking forward to working with this yarn for an actual garment. Just a quick couple interesting fun facts about the American Jacob, which began importation into the United States and Canada in the 1900s, and they have diverged genetically from the British Jacob, but they are listed on our threatened list here in the U.S., which means there's less than 1,000 individuals registered every year and less than 5,000 individuals globally. So the American Livestock Conservancy has a different qualification and priority list than, let's say, the British. Their parameters are different, and I think how they choose to, recommend or create their priority lists are different. So the American Jacob, like I said, is on the threatened list here in the U.S., and they are what's called, this is just a fun fact, a polycerate, so they have multiple horns. And let's see, that's it. I wanted to just kind of throw that out there as we're kind of talking a little bit about Jacob. So it is exciting to see a Jacob yarn come out kind of commercially and be available and be spun and sorted in a thoughtful way. So thank you, Blacker. So the last couple of things I thought I would talk about were the Shackleton yarn. Thank you so much. That went out and it sold out immediately, and that was exciting for me. I am working on some new yarns, and they will be coming out soon. So I'll be talking about them here. I'll be talking about them on Instagram. So keep your eye out there. Right. So upcoming events for me include Edinburgh Yarn Festival, and I can't wait. Please come and say hello. I have a few spots left in my Wool Scouts retreat. You can find all the information about Wool Scouts on my webpage, and I will probably just put a link to that. And it does outline all of the retreat details with Mary Jane Mucklestone. I just posted that registration is open for my Highlands on the Fly. That takes place in October, the weekend after Rhinebeck, again in the Northwoods. Both of those are Northwoods right up by my house. Well, relative to retreats. And I think there might be 1 or 2 spaces left in my coastal retreat at Machias Port this summer, and you can find information for that at onelupin.com under the events section of her website. So if you are looking for an adventure in Maine, or a wool adventure in Maine, then go ahead and check out any one of those. We'd love to see you here and show you around and introduce you to the secret fiber world of Maine, because I think it is one of the best kept secrets that's going.
So here we are, we're out at the beaver flowage. You can see some of that action here. We're actually walking across the dam that they built. There is one lodge. And if I scan back over here, we can see the other lodge. So I thought I would show you some cool tracks that I found. Ruby, let's go. I'm gonna keep an eye on Ruby at the same time we go over to see them. I'm not 100% sure, come on, what they are. We've been over here once before, and I was kind of hoping the wind would cooperate this time. Come on, Ruby. So you can see that they come, Ruby, come. out of it. You can see that they come right up out of that stream, the flowage area, which I'm not going to walk over, and they come right down here. Now, I'm not 100% sure if these are beaver or otter, so I'll have to go look that up, but those are kind of my two choices. Ruby, this way. Ruby, Ruby, come. Do not walk on the tracks. Okay. Oh, the hazards of hanging out with your dog and tracking at the same time. So anyway, I'm gonna go home and look those up. I'll report back. But I have seen otter sign here, and we can follow these tracks. I'll gently try to pan over this way. And if I was a little bit more sure of what was underneath, oh, that's a good one right here. Do you see like they look like little hands? Ruby. Ruby. Oops, I just went through. So, okay. But they go off into the distance there. Okay, come on, Roops, this way. Listen. Right, so we'll have to look those up. We'll think a little bit about patterns. Obviously, we'll think about where we are, what we see. All of that can help you deduce, sorry, you're just looking at this beautiful tree, help deduce what you're looking at and narrow down the possibilities. So yeah, so we'll see you back at the house. I thought I would try to include you on a quick walk with Ruby and I. It's actually not quick for us, but this segment will be. We are out on an old woods road in southern Maine. We're headed into a beaver pond area, so I'll show you the huts. And I just wanted to see if you could, although Ruby's right there, we've been following a set of coyote tracks along this walk. We've seen mink and we've seen snowshoe hare and deer, but these coyotes, and you can see, I think there's 3 animals running this. There's 3 sets of tracks. There you go. And I'm thinking these are coyote because Ruby's about 35 pounds and I can compare her track to theirs versus a fox. They're pretty big, so it's safe to say we have coyote. These are big. They're our largest of the canine megafauna here in the state. So we're off, and Ruby has found some scat. Scat is the term we use to talk about poop in the wild, in the wilderness, I guess you could say. We like to use manure for the farm and scat for the woods. So here we are, just walking, and I'm sure you can hear that wind. I see some little chickadees flying around. Wow, look at the wind coming off that. And you can just see the beaver lodge. There's actually 2, and I didn't realize it was going to be this windy. We've been protected in the woods. So when we get to the beaver pond, I will show you.
Now, some adventures that Ruby and I have been having have included a lot of tracks, especially up north. When I was home on vacation, we saw lynx, we saw fisher, we saw moose, we saw partridge, snowshoe hare. So there was a lot happening in the woods, and I love track stories. One particular afternoon, we headed down the snowmobile trail after a fresh snow, and we followed 2 fisher tracks right along the trail, and they would go down into the brooks and they'd come back up and they'd disappear and come back, and there'd be snowshoe hare tracks running across or mouse tracks, and it's just really fun to think about that story and think about what did that look like and what were they thinking. This time of year is when they pair off to mate, so I wondered if they were kind of coming together to breed, and it was really exciting to think that we've got fishers in the back. After a fresh snow, Rob and I went out, and snowshoe hare tracks everywhere. The number 1 predator of snowshoe hare is lynx. Those 2 populations are very much tied together, and they tend to go up and down, the snowshoe hares, and then that affects the lynx populations here in Maine. And so we saw snowshoe hare tracks everywhere, and I was really surprised I hadn't seen lynx, because we see lynx a lot. Lynx are a cat. I can show you a picture. These are handy dandy little field guides. I always like to have, this is a Maine Geographic. It's put out by DeLorme, which is no longer. So let me grab a picture of a lynx. This is a bobcat. which is similar to a lynx, but not the same. I've never seen a cat in the state. My husband's seen lynx carrying snowshoe hare, running across the trail. I mean, he's had a number of really interesting wildlife experiences, and I don't know. It's funny, they have bobcat, but they don't have the lynx. Well, I'll show you a picture of the bobcat. That is so strange. Wow, it says the bobcat prefers a diet of deer and snowshoe hare. Anyway, so this is what they are. They're similar. This is not a lynx. One thing that's really cool about lynx is when you find cat tracks, they're very round. And lynx in particular, because they have the ability to stay on top of the snow. So they are very well adapted to snowy climates. And I don't really think that these track images show you just how distinct they are when you see them, because they are round. So dogs are kind of more pyramidal shape, and these are round. So when we think about tracking, I'm not a track expert. I think I probably said that. I've re-recorded a couple pieces, so I'm not really sure what I said and what's included. One thing that I always look for is pattern and shape. It's similar when I do, I'm not a birder, but I enjoy looking at birds, but I always look for kind of shapes of the bird, which will help me identify which kind of family it might be involved in, like a woodpecker versus a, you know, like a hawk, or a warbler versus a robin. They have different shapes. You look for that shape, and then you can look for color patterns. I'm terrible at sounds. I cannot identify a lot of birds by their calls. But anyway, so patterns are really important when you're starting to think about looking around you and looking for animal signs. When we look at track patterns, we have walkers, which we're walkers, or moose or deer are walkers. We have waddlers, which are kind of like skunks and raccoons and beavers. And so they have a kind of a distinct track pattern of kind of waddling, where walkers are kind of like deep, 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 so you can see that pattern. We have bounders, which would be the fisher or a weasel. I think there's a picture of a fisher in here. River otters are bounders. Mink, here's a fisher. So again, a kind of a distinct track pattern with each one of these guys. Walkers, bounders, waddlers, oh, and hoppers. So hoppers would be like rabbits, where you have, here's a snowshoe hare. And they turn white in the winter and lose their color again, or go back to their kind of brown fawny color in the summer, autumn. So hoppers tend to have like 2 little dots and 2 big dots on the, or 2 long tracks on the outside. So that's the first thing I look for, is the pattern, and then I look at kind of this. I look at the environment around me, like, oh, there's a beaver lodge here, I'm in a flowage, or it's in the water, or is there a tail pattern or a belly pattern or a slide that might give you some hints about what you're looking at. Now, none of this, when you see the footage that I add, I didn't take any measurements. Of course, when I called my husband, Rob, he was like, well, what was the measurement? What was the distance between tracks? How big were the tracks? And I was like, I don't know. So obviously I'm not an expert tracker, but it is helpful to, you know, put your hand down and see if you can figure out the size of the track and the distance between front hind legs, and the distance between different, you know, kind of movements. So anyway, I didn't do any of that. So I think I've deduced that it was a fisher, what you're going to see in the video, the tracks, or maybe a river otter or an otter. I don't think it was a beaver, even though that's kind of what intuitively made sense to me, because they went in the water, or they jumped, you know, they were around this flowage and they came out of a drainage, but yeah. So the other animal I talked about in the footage, high goose, moves right there, is a coyote. So I think this is the largest resident canine population that we have. And they tend to be, I guess, upwards of anywhere from 50 to 80 pounds. I might be making that up, so take it with a grain of salt. They have, again, here's the dog track, really, you know, has kind of that pyramid shaped, and you can see the claws. So in the video you're going to see, I end up following a set of, I think, 3 individuals, and then a 4th one joins and then leaves. And then, of course, through all that is deer tracks, snowshoe hare tracks. So there was a lot going on in the woods that day. Of course, a beautiful fresh snow on top of a layer of hard crust is great tracking. So I think that was kind of my adventures last week, and I think that's predominantly what I talk about. So Fisher, the other animal I thought it might be, because we do have them, is an otter. And again, this is another bounder. So otters and fishers are both bounders. They can have somewhat similar patterns of tracks, and I didn't use enough of my prowess to take measurements and get closer because I didn't. So that's a little bit about Maine and what I've been seeing and having a good time being outdoors and thinking about stories, wildlife stories. So I think with that being said, I'm ready to say farewell, get this edited. I have some work to do. I have some sewing I want to get done, and and like I said, I'm sorry for the rather reserved state of affairs here, but I will be packing this video camera, I think, for Edinburgh, and I'm looking forward to getting away and having a bit of a wool adventure abroad. So in the meantime, wherever your fiber trucks may take you, may you return safe and with lots of soulful stash. I'll see you next time. Bye.